sometimes you've got to take your shoes off, sometimes you don't. Oh, you know, why have I got to take my laptop out of the bag? All this kind of stuff. Now, interestingly, I noticed a weird thing, which is, I don't know if anybody knows Ebbsfleet. It's the high-speed station just outside the M25 in Kent. And I often, if I go to Paris or I go to Brussels, because I live in Sevenoaks, rather than driving all the way, going all the way into St Pancras and out again, I just go to Ebbsfleet. And I noticed a very weird thing, because Ebbsfleet isn't that busy, but it does have X-ray security and stuff, obviously, because it's an international train. I just noticed that whenever you actually arrived at Ebbsfleet in the security queue, and there was no one behind you, it wasn't at all stressful. It was like really chilled. There was no one in the queue behind you. You just put your stuff in. You know, you had a bit of a chat with the bloody people doing it. It was all a bit matey. I thought, that's a bit weird. What's going on here? And then I spoke to people at KFC and spoke to people at McDonald's, and they said, we've got this weird thing, which is people standing queuing, waiting for a Mucky D's or a KFC. And they're in the queue for 6 minutes. They've had nothing to do, maybe even 8 minutes. They've had nothing to do but look at the menu and prepare their order. Right? They can rehearse if they wanted to. In logical terms, by the time they get to the front of the queue, they should be so well rehearsed in what they want, they should be able to claim it like a Shakespearean actor. You know, I would like a bargain bucket. You know. And they don't. They get to the front of the queue and they totally fuck it up. I go, hold on a second, 3 of those. And they asked the question as I did, what's causing this? And we both came to the same conclusion independently. It's stage fright, actually. Your unconscious is aware of the people behind you and you're frightened of messing it up. So stage fright is a very, very weird and powerful force in human fear. I mean, how strange it is difficult to exaggerate. So there are people who will go bungee jumping, paragliding, you know, cave diving, etc., who would lose sleep for 3 months if they had to give a best man speech. It's a very funny thing, by the way. If you do public speaking, you've got to do it quite often. Because if you do it once a week or once a fortnight, you're still a bit nervous, but you're relatively chill. I was talking to Paul Feldwick again about this. In July and August, there are no speaking events, so you don't do any speaking. And before you give your first talk on sort of the 7th of September, you're crapping it. It's really weird. You know, you give them sort of 5 talks in July and you're fairly chilled, and then you have a break, and the next talk you go, I'm going to be really shit, I'm just crapping it now. And so the stage fright is, so the interesting way is, if you want to make airport security less stressful, the solution is not to listen to what people say, because they're talking rubbish. The solution is actually, you could put a curtain there, so when you get to the front of the queue, you go through a curtain, and all that taking your jacket off stuff happens in private. What your brain is thinking is, I'm going to mess this up, and there are 20 people in the queue who are going to go, dickhead's forgotten to take his belt off. What an arse, see? And that, I don't know why, it genuinely frightens us. Being the centre of attention is frightening. Or there are other ways you could solve it. You could have little cubicles where you do it in your own time, or you could do what they do at Gatwick now. Anybody flown out Gatwick in the last few months? Where you all split, the queue splits into like 6, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 position, then there's 6 people waiting behind those people, and then there's the queue. So you're not the centre of attention, because there are actually 6 people simultaneously doing what you're doing on the belt, and there's only 1 person directly behind you. And I don't know if you noticed, it's just not, it wasn't very stressy, was it? I actually pressed the happy face coming through that airport security at Gatwick. And you can really, really solve emotional problems just by a combination of kind of, human insight and a bit of evolutionary psychology. But I mean, the stage fright thing is really worth investigating, because there are people I've known who have literally the most terrifying experience in their life. Americans are one quite good thing with American schools is because they do a lot of show and tell. I think the effect of that is to make Americans a bit less scared of it than Brits are, interestingly. Now, I better skip all this because I'm on a very strict time plan. But the reason, this is to seem Caleb's point, the reason that our brains don't use conventional logic, okay, is that in the real world, absolutely strict scientific logic isn't very useful very often. There are very few real-world problems that are solved simply through... You know those fake GCSE maths questions you used to get, which is 2 buses leave a bus station at noon, 1 travels due north at a constant 40 kilometres an hour, 1 travels due west at a constant 30. What time will it be when they're 100 kilometres apart? It's 2 o'clock, okay? Right? But it's a bit of a con, that, isn't it? Because what the maths teacher is trying to pretend is that maths can be used to solve real-world problems. Well, only in a weird fantasy world where buses travel at straight lines at a constant speed and leave at the same time, right? Most real-world problems are, how do I avoid missing my bus? Okay? There are multiple right answers to that, you know. And so this idea that there aren't that many real-world questions to which science has a single unambiguously correct answer than which no other answer is more correct, okay? The number of answers in real-life questions where you optimise is remarkably few. If you're choosing who to marry, for example, don't over-optimise, because there's a name for people who are obsessed with maximising the person they marry, and they're called single, basically. Then you blokes here, I found Sex and the City madly frustrating, because basically, quite often these women, you know, they had a bloke who was all right, didn't they? And you thought, he's all right, what's the problem? And they kept going, oh, it's not quite this, or it's not, I'm not watching this anymore, it's stupid, right? And the interesting thing is, there are a whole range of problems you can kind of get in the world. There are simple optimization problems where there's a single right answer, but there are a tiny minority of problems. We need completely different mental mechanisms to solve most real-world problems: where you live, who you marry, you know, how you make a journey, you know, what you eat, you know, etc., etc. There aren't single right answers to any of these. An interesting one, by the way, is, you know, what do you do when you use TripAdvisor? Do you go to the top-rated restaurant in town, or is there a really interesting heuristic where you know, maybe actually the trick is to go to the 20th best restaurant in town, because the first best one will be disproportionately popular and will become overpriced. Paul Craven and I, he's a financial guy, a Goldman Sachs asset manager who's also big on behavioural science. We both bought holiday homes in Deal, because we said that Deal is the 12th best seaside town in Britain, and that's the one you want. You can go to Salcombe, which is probably the best seaside town in Britain, but basically a shed will cost you £2 million. Okay, and also the place is full of wankers. You know, so that, you know, it's not a simple go for the best. Very, very few solutions are like go for the best. I'll skip this. I'll skip this for reasons of time. Now, a really interesting question is the question of calibration. And the question of calibration in the brain. If you think about it, if you've got a smoke detector. Now, your smoke detector goes off when you make toast, okay? That doesn't make it a bad smoke detector, because you have to set a smoke detector at a certain level of sensitivity. And what smoke detector designers have decided, quite rightly, is that it's better to have a paranoid smoke detector than a chilled smoke detector. Because a false positive is a bit annoying, because you're making toast and the thing starts beeping. But a false positive isn't nearly as bad as a false negative. What you really don't want is a smoke detector that at 3 o'clock in the morning goes, oh, that's funny, it's a really strange smell. It's there, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. You don't want your smoke detector to do that. So we all have to be calibrated. So a lot of what people think of as human irrationality is just a question of calibration. So let me explain this. We are calibrating our brains to recognise faces. Because it's to our evolutionary advantage to spot a face and to be able to detect both animal faces and human faces, and also to be able to detect animal emotion and human emotion, our visual system is disproportionately face-focused. As a result of that, okay, like a smoke detector, it means we will quite often detect faces when there aren't any. And the reason is that if you don't ever have false positives, it means you're crap at spotting faces. And it's much more important to be good at spotting a face when it's hiding in a bush than it is to occasionally go, ha ha ha, that thing over there looks a bit like a chicken, right? So there's a thing called pareidolia in the human brain which effectively causes you to see the man in the moon. It causes you to... Now, this is a beautiful example of pareidolia. I thought that was actually really rather good. Someone who added roundel windows to a church in Florida